Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to trace a tragic, deeply interconnected sequence of events. We're going to look at the domino effect of Haiti's institutional collapse. We'll start big, looking at macro-level state security, and then follow those falling dominoes all the way down to a highly specific and frankly startling medical study conducted right inside the country's prisons. It's a fascinating, sobering look at how systems completely unravel.
So, how exactly does a government lose control of its own institutions? We're skipping the usual agenda today to jump right into this critical question. We really want to examine how a breakdown in basic, foundational state security inevitably creates a humanitarian disaster across all levels of society. I mean, when the state can no longer maintain a monopoly on security, what actually happens to the institutions that rely on that stability to function?
Section 1. State Capacity and Gang Violence. Let's dive right into this broad loss of state control. To understand this, we're drawing directly on the 2024 U.S. State Department Human Rights Report on Haiti, which paints a very clear picture of a government struggling to protect civilians.
To really put a number on that breakdown, 3,884. According to the UN Integrated Office in Haiti, that is the number of deaths and injuries that resulted from gang violence in just the first 6 months of 2024 alone. The sheer scale of that is absolutely staggering, with the vast majority happening in the West Department, which includes the capital, Port-au-Prince.
And honestly, nothing illustrates this institutional breakdown more starkly than what happened during that same violent first quarter of 2024. More than 4,600 inmates escaped from major prisons. Basically, gang coalitions were directly challenging the government, attacking at least 22 police facilities in the process. When gangs can literally empty major state penitentiaries, the state has fundamentally lost its grip on security.
Which brings us to Section 2, the rise of vigilante justice. Because, when a government can't effectively investigate or prosecute gang violence, and when citizens are left entirely undefended, well, they often take matters into their own hands. The absence of state justice creates this massive vacuum, and that vacuum is very quickly filled by street justice.
This void in security gave rise to a movement known as Bois Calais, which translates to peel wood in Haitian Creole. This is a brutal vigilante movement where targets, often individuals who are merely suspected of being gang members, are beaten, dismembered, or even burned alive by organized citizen defense groups. And the government, which is stretched far too thin, has been largely unable to investigate or prosecute these acts.
But it gets even more complicated and terrifying. The State Department noted credible reports of actual police complicity in these vigilante killings. A particularly horrifying incident from the report notes that an ambulance run by the international NGO Doctors Without Borders, which was carrying 3 gunshot victims, was intersected by police. The police then evicted the medical staff and handed the patients over to a vigilante mob for execution. Only one of those 3 patients survived.
Moving right along to Section 3, a paralyzed legal system. As state control just evaporates and vigilante violence explodes on the streets, the institutions designed to process crime and administer justice simply grind to a halt under the weight of the surrounding chaos.
There is such a stark, heartbreaking contrast between what Haitian law promises on paper and the reality documented by human rights groups. The Constitution strictly prohibits arbitrary arrest, right? It guarantees the right to challenge detention. But the reality is a completely hollowed-out legal system defined by arbitrary judicial discretion and incredibly poor record-keeping. Detainees can spend years locked up without ever appearing before a judge, sometimes held far longer than the mandatory sentences for the crimes they are merely accused of committing.
Because of this severe judicial gridlock, prisons aren't filling up with convicted criminals, they're filling up with people waiting for a trial that may never actually come. Based on World Prison Brief data from 2025, a massive 82% of all inmates in Haiti are pre-trial detainees. 82%! They haven't been convicted of anything. They're simply trapped in a holding pattern by a system that has just stopped functioning.
Consequently, this bottleneck has completely flooded the penal system. It drives the official occupancy rate of the country's prisons to an entirely unsustainable 302% of their actual capacity. 302%. You have facilities built for a few hundred people that are literally holding thousands.
And that brings us to Section 4, the crisis inside prisons. This total state gridlock traps a massively overcrowded population inside a system that literally cannot even feed them. It sets the stage for a fascinating, yet incredibly grim 2022 medical case study that shows exactly what macro-level collapse looks like on a microscopic human scale.
Researchers publishing in the journal Frontiers in Medicine recognized a dire nutritional crisis happening in Haitian prisons. So, they attempted to implement a quality improvement program in 2 facilities, the massive National Penitentiary and the Mirabelais prison. Their plan was completely logical. Teach the prison cooks how to maximize the nutrition of the food they were preparing using culturally consistent substitutions to fight off severe malnutrition.
The researchers did a baseline assessment in 2021, rolled out their education program, and then returned in 2022 for a follow-up. Astonishingly, between the baseline assessment and the follow-up, the average daily diet actually dropped. I mean, it went from an already starvation level 571 calories a day down to just 445 calories a day. The number of meals served per day also substantially decreased.
The clinical progression of the systemic collapse is staggering to see. By 2022, there was near total population risk for diseases we usually associate with the distant past. Over 93% of inmates were at risk for scurvy, a severe vitamin C deficiency, and almost 99% were at risk for beriberi. These are historical conditions, practically unheard of in functional societies today, re-emerging simply because the diet was essentially reduced to nothing but small amounts of dried goods.
Now, you might be asking yourself right now, why did a well-intentioned, expertly designed health initiative fail so dramatically? Well, this brings us to Section 5, Why Solutions Are Failing. On paper, the researchers followed perfectly standard, logical steps to intervene. They identified the missing nutrients, they educated the cooks on simple ingredient substitutions, like using enriched rice instead of white rice. They did everything right according to standard public health education models.
But the intervention turned out to be a hollow victory. Why? Because, think about it, you can give a cook a great, highly nutritious recipe, but it absolutely doesn't matter if they don't have the ingredients. The cooks were entirely dependent on unpredictable external food deliveries. And outside those prison walls, extreme political unrest, gang blockades, and violence were stopping varied food supplies from ever reaching the prison gates. Plus, security issues caused multi-day prison lockdowns where inmates received zero food whatsoever. The cooks literally had no control over what they could cook.
The researchers came to a really sobering realization. They concluded that standard interventions to improve nutrition simply must consider the social context for accessing food. I mean, you cannot educate your way out of starvation if the foundational environment is too chaotic and dangerous to allow for basic food access. The breakdown of the state outside the prison completely neutralized any attempt at reform inside it.
I want to leave you with this final thought to take away from this explainer. When we look at data and when we try to solve a crisis, we have to look at the whole system. We have to ask ourselves, can you even fix the domino at the very end of the line if the ones at the top of the chain are still falling? Thank you so much for joining me to explore this complex and vital topic.